Good morning. I'm excited to be here with you. My name is Dustin, for those of you who may not know me. I want to encourage you, if you have your Bibles, we're going to go to Daniel chapter 6 today. We've been going through this series called Thriving in Babylon. And it's a story of basically Daniel and his friends, but mostly Daniel. And we see him going through his life having to live in this anti-faith society. The society that completely attacks him and any exertion of faith, any exercise of faith. And Daniel somehow is able to thrive in this society in Babylon. He's able to thrive in Babylon, not just survive, not just barely make it, but actually thrive. And God uses Daniel to do amazing things. So I want to take a look at one of the stories, one of the most famous stories about Daniel in the lion's den today. And it's important to understand something. So Daniel is now, he is serving probably the third king that he has served throughout this whole time. Remember in the very first chapter, if you were here, the very first chapter, Daniel was taken from his country as a young boy, probably a young teenager, maybe 13 or 14. And he was brought to Babylon, and there he was trained, and he had to take some steps of faith as a young boy. And under the king of Nebuchadnezzar, and what's crazy is through Daniel's faithfulness to God, he eventually brings this king, Nebuchadnezzar, to a relationship with God. And this Nebuchadnezzar comes and proclaims to the whole world that, hey, this Daniel's God is the one most high God, the real God, above everything else. It's pretty amazing. And then there was another king. Last week, Pastor Steve, he talked about it, Belshazzar. And he was another king, and he didn't follow God, and he eventually got killed pretty quickly. And now we're in king number 3. He had 4 kings that he served under, but here's king number 3, and this is Darius the Mede. And once again, we see Daniel serving this king, and somehow he rises to the top. He ends up thriving in a whole nother regime, whole nother governmental regime. It's like, the Republicans left the White House, the Democrats come in, and normally they just clean house. But here somehow Daniel rises to the top. And take a look at this verse in Daniel 6:3. It says, Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Wow. Here, once again, God is blessing Daniel. Now, he's grown now. You realize, in chapter 1, he was a young boy. Most scholars believe that at this point in chapter 6, Daniel is around 80 years old. He's an elderly statesman. He's proven himself faithful throughout his entire life. And it just goes to show you, and what I love about this book of Daniel is just goes to show you, you're never too young, chapter 1, and you're never too old, chapter 6, to be used by God. But also, you're never too young and you're never too old to take steps of faith. Because once again, we're going to see here, Daniel is going to have to take a step of faith. And, I don't know how many times I've heard people comment, I've grown up in church. My dad was a pastor, and I've been a pastor all my life, basically. And I remember having people coming to me, and they says, you know what, I'm too old to serve. I've served my time. And it's time for, me to take a break. And you need to realize that kind of thinking is not Christian. It doesn't come from the Bible. Daniel's 80 years young, and God's still going to use him. Remember Moses? He started at 80. He started leading the people at 80. There's no retirement when it comes to being a follower of Jesus. We're called to give of ourselves as living sacrifice, not just until we retire. Those of you who are late in years in your life, you need to realize that your faith is being watched. There are people who are following your footsteps that are watching your example of faith, even at the end of life. I'm a perfect example of this. There's a young couple in Santa Rosa, and here's a picture of them, Nick and Lolly Nickerson. And they're in their 80s. And they come to our Together in Christ prayer meetings on Wednesday mornings for the community and for community leaders and for business leaders and just intercessors. They just come and pray for our community and for the good of the community. And they've been coming, and I have my office. I could see the parking lot. And Nick and Lolly is suffering from brain cancer. And she comes, he normally drops her off really close. And he gets out, he gets a stroller out, one of those walkers, and sets it up. She slowly gets up. I mean, she's fragile. Like, I always think I'm going to either have to call 911 or go out there and, help her up or something like that because she might fall over. She's extremely fragile, right? So she's coming in, and he's just gently, lovingly taking her through. He's no young spring chicken either. He's got his own health issues. Last year, they took some of our pastors, Barney and Linda, to India as missionaries. And guess where they're at this month? India. They are there again this month. They were praying about it, and they decided to take Lolly off of chemotherapy for this month while they go. And they are going off to India. Why? Why? That the worldly side of me says they're too old. What good can they do? They're fragile. Seriously, they could die on this trip. One of them could. And yet, for their perspective, they're like, you know what? God's calling us. God's calling us to go over there, and for some reason, there's favor. They're actually asking for us to come. The men there over in India, and the relationship between men and women are totally treated badly, especially in marriages. And the relationship that they see Nick, here this elderly guy tenderly guiding his wife and helping her and loving her. They're actually asking him to share, how do you love your wife like Christ loves the church? Pretty amazing. And God is using them. And they said, you know what? Yeah, we're fragile. We admit this. In fact, our daughter is coming, and our daughter's a nurse, and she's coming just to take care of Lolly. And they're like, but we could die tomorrow here. Or we could die tomorrow in India, and in 5 minutes we'll be with God. No matter where we're at. But there are people, if they were to die today, they wouldn't be with God. And we want to tell them about Jesus. We want to give them an opportunity. So as long as we're breathing, we're going to tell other people about Christ. I tell you, I hope when I'm that age, I have that same spirit. Because that's the kind of example, that's the kind of person that I want to be when I'm there. My wife has always said, I want to be that 80-year-old grandma in the youth ministry, in the student ministry, saying, turn it up, That's what she wants to do. But there's this example of faith because there's this example that we have for other people. You realize that your example. Remember last week when Steve talked about Dave from the Crossing the Jordan, pancreatic cancer. I need to tell you another story that happened just this week, and he was here this morning. Just this week he went to the doctor, and the doctors came back with the tests, and they said, there's no more cancer in your body. And I told Dave this morning, I said, Dave, how you have lived throughout this is an example for me. If I face health news like that, where it's like you got maybe months to live, a few months maybe, I want to remain faithful. I'm hoping I will remain faithful. But I want to have that kind of faith that Dave has. That's an example. You're never too old, you're never too young to be used by God. You need to realize that. I hope we all can. I hope we can follow the sacrificial example that we have been shown by other people. And, like Nick and Lolly, they're going to India. Now, hopefully we can follow that example. Maybe we don't have to go to India. Maybe we can just help out with the harvest party. Right? That's not as big as the step. You don't need a passport, but come and serve. Right? What's the big deal? It's a couple hours. And you get to show God's love. People will get to come in here, and we get to we get to show God's love to people. What an example we can be. Have you prayed about that yet? We'd love for you to help out. Glenn's going to be in the back. But please consider that. What about this? How about inviting a friend to church? It's a step of faith. God, there's that person in my life. We all have people. You don't have to go to India to find people that are not going to heaven right now. They're right next door. They're the people you work with every day, and they need to know about God's love. God put you in their lives for that reason. It's not an accident. I want to encourage you to think about that. Starting November 6th, we're moving our early service that's normally at 8:30 to 9 o'clock because we want to make it easy for people to come to Christ. We want to make it easy for people to come to church. Is it hard to wake up at 8:30 and go? Yes. I'm a pastor and I still get there, but it's hard, right? So let's make it a little bit easier. Let's try to make it at 9 o'clock. And we want people here. Part of our efforts is we're going to try to explain stories like today's story, Daniel in the lion's den. Sometimes people go, oh yeah, you know the story about Daniel in the lion's den. Well, there's some people who don't know. And so we want to explain that for people who are because we want to do, just like Nick and Lolly, they want to do whatever they can, short of sinning, to bring people to Christ. And that's exactly what we want to do. And because we are, okay, we'll do whatever we can. We want to be sacrificial, self-sacrificial. Okay, for my discomfort, I'm willing to do something. Paul talked about this in Philippians 2:17. He says, but I will rejoice even if I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God, and I want all of you to share in that joy. He says, I will just pour out my life. I'm a living sacrifice right now. He says, you know what? Whatever happens here, I will rejoice even if I lose my life. And what happened to Paul? He lost his life. He lost his life because he witnessed to Caesar. He got to tell Caesar about Jesus, and then Caesar eventually killed him. And he says, I will rejoice because my life is a sacrifice. Because it's not about what's here on earth. I will choose to be faithful. See, our walk with God is not over it's not over until here on earth, He's done with us, and then He takes us. And so today we're going to look at Daniel, and Daniel's going to have to take these steps of faith. And he's 80 years old, and yet he still has to take these steps of faith. And he's been taking them his whole life. And some of those steps were easy. Some of those steps were kind of difficult. Some of them were scary. But what was crazy about how Daniel was able to thrive is he was consistent. He would consistently say, okay, God, I'm going to take that step, and I'm going to trust you. And he took that step. Now, was he perfect? No. No, he wasn't perfect at all. I mean, that's why he needed God in his life. But part of his thriving in Babylon was his consistency and his character. Now, was because he was faithful, because he was consistent, did he mean that everything went well? No. We've seen that throughout this entire book. We've seen really good people who are faithful to God get treated horribly. And that will happen in this world. And we're going to see that right here. Daniel chapter 6, verse 4. It says, then the other administrators and the high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. Tell me an employer that wouldn't want someone like Daniel. Faithful, always responsible, completely trustworthy. So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. I love how they couldn't find anything against Daniel. And so they're like, let's try to attack his faith. He had lived a faithful, trustworthy life. I mean, he wasn't even a Raiders fan. That could have messed him up. Right? I mean, he wasn't. But hopefully, I hope to be spoken of the same way they spoke of Daniel. We can't figure out anything to accuse Dustin of, but it's just his faith. Let's try to attack that. And I hope we can do that. Unfortunately, I probably have a few hang-ups. I do have a few hang-ups and sins that I'm ashamed of, that probably someone could accuse me of something. Thankfully, that's why we have Jesus, and he forgives us of those things. But the jealous officials, they came up with a scheme. They convinced the king. They said, okay, king, hey, let's make this new law. And the new law is this. For the next 30 days, no one can pray to anything or anyone except for you. I mean, and they're buttering up this king. And this king's got an ego. And he's like, yeah, I like that idea. So no matter what religion you are, you have to pray to just you. What do you say, king? And he's like, okay, let's make this rule. And then, if they pray to something else, what do you say? We throw them into your den of lions. You know, there's this room that the king has underneath his house. Who has a den of lions underneath his house? It's full of lions. Why? What den of lions? What? Why would he do that? Well, you know, throughout history, tyrants have used fear to intimidate people, right? I mean, just a few weeks ago, Forrest was talking about the fiery furnace, right? Remember that fiery furnace? And that was pretty scary. It was scary. 500 years later, after this story, the Romans came up with this thing called the cross. And it inflicted fear. Then there was, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, Jabba the Hutt had something underneath his palace, a rancor monster. You know that story, right? It's almost like, you know, scripture. Not quite, but probably. Well, Darius was a cat man. He wasn't a dog guy. He was a cat man. He had lions underneath his house. And these lions were scary and ferocious, and everybody was kind of afraid of it. And when they came up with this law, Daniel had a choice to make. This is scary. What do? Do I live in fear, or do I choose to live in faith? Do I let the fear rule me? Do I give into that temptation to let the fear rule me, or do I live a life of faith? This is the same choice that Daniel had in chapter 1. Remember when he had to decide between eating vegetables or the food that was sacrificed to the idols? And he had to make a step of faith. And here's the same choice. Do I live in fear, or do I live in faith? Same choice we have every day. Do I remain faithful and obedient to God even when I don't feel like it? Even when it's not comfortable? Do I honor God with my money, or do I save a little bit just in case? Do I choose to serve as one of God's family, or do I stay at home and watch football on the couch? Do I choose to speak the truth even though it may mean I might suffer consequences for the truth coming out? Do I confess my sins to others so that I may be healed? Or do I hide my sin away for fear of being found out? Do I invite my coworker to church, or do I avoid the God subject altogether for fear of being looked at, you know, in those weird ways? You know how they look at people like that. Fear or faith? Which one wins? For Daniel, his fear and faith were between death and life. The lion's den or life. And once again, he's 80 years old. Now surely, God, I'm 80. I mean, haven't I been faithful all my life? And there's times when it was life and death, and surely I could be, 80 years of faithfulness. Why would you expect me to go one more time? Now, I think, here's a side note. I believe that God is more passionate about your spiritual growth than he is about your physical comfort. Your spiritual growth is way more important than your physical comfort, because one of those is temporary and one of those is permanent. And we have to figure out, what are we going to let rule our lives? Daniel has to take this step of faith in this area of growth still. I think God was trying to teach him something. Even in 80, he can learn something. And I think God was trying to teach him, say, look, I know you were faithful with me as a child. And you've been faithful with me all your life. But do you believe that I can still be faithful in this? Even in your old age, I can be faithful. See, there's a lot of times that Christians who have been Christians for many years will look back on their lives and they'll remember the good old days when they were young and it felt like God was moving all the time, and they'll tell stories about, God was totally moving. We had worship times and it was great. They'll tell those stories about the good old days, and God says, aren't I the God of today as well? Can't I move today? Not just way back when everyone was having a good time. And he's trying to teach Daniel, I am the God of today. I still move today. The question is are you going to take a step of faith? And so Daniel has to take a step of faith. The law is enacted. You cannot pray to anyone but the king. And in verse 10, it says this: when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down, as usual, in his upstairs room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he always had done, giving thanks to his God. Now notice how much Daniel agonized about this decision and debated within himself. It took a whole half second, right? I mean, for me, I'd be like, okay, God, what if I just pray silently in my heart? Just, like you do, before breakfast or when you're at the mall and you look around, make sure no one's looking at you. And amen. And then you start eating your hamburger, right? What if you do it silently? Or what if I just don't talk to you for 30 days? We'll just put our conversation on pause. I'll talk to you at the end of the month. What do you say? I mean, that's what I would do. But not Daniel. Daniel's like, for him, this was actually an easy decision. He went home just as he always had done, and he just continued to pray. It was easy for him to take this step of faith because he had been taking steps of faith every single day of his life. And this was just one more. And what's crazy, and when you first starting to take steps of faith, it's pretty scary. I mean, think about this. Maybe you remember the first time someone invited you to church. How scary was that? Oh, I'm going to church. What will people think? And what do I have to wear? And will they accept me? All these things, all these questions, these fears that if you've been a Christian for a long time, you forget about how scary it is to come to church. And then you want me to pray out loud to this invisible God? That's kind of weird looking, isn't it? Praying to this, what? Oh, you want me to go? And you want me to go in front of the church and confess me before others? You want me to go and say, I believe that Jesus is Christ, the Son of God? That's scary. I mean, there's a lot of people, even at first service and second, that's scary. I'm an introvert. Oh, you want me to go up and you want me to get dunked in the water? Get baptized? It's not even sunny outside. It's raining outside. You want me to get baptized? That's kind of scary. That's why I love watching adult baptisms. Because they're saying, you know what, it doesn't matter. This is important. But it goes on. There's so many other things. You want me to give back a portion of what I've earned back to God with my money. You want me to humble myself and go and ask forgiveness of someone else that I've sinned against? And admit that I've messed up? You want me to offer to pray for my coworker and tell them about God? See, each of those steps really seems scary at first. But what's crazy is when you start taking a step, you notice something. All of a sudden you start realizing that God meets you there when you take that step. And then you take another step, and all of a sudden, God meets you there. And then after a while, you start walking, and you look back, and you realize you're not in the same place that you were at before. See, God's not interested in leaving you where you're at. He's interested in taking you someplace. And He's interested in transforming your life. And every step of the way, God meets you there. He heals you. He restores you. For Daniel, he'd been following God every day, step by step. And he'd come to this conclusion. He said, God, you have been faithful with me since I was a young child. And you've met me every step of the way. And maybe today he was like, you know what? I'm going to be faithful to you no matter what. No matter what happens, no matter what storms this world brings me. No matter how scary it gets, you've been faithful to me, I'm going to be faithful to you. Now here you see Daniel at 80, someone who is spiritually mature. Because he doesn't allow the external circumstances to motivate him, but he allows this internal faith to motivate him. And that's huge. Because we all go through storms. And during those storms, it's easy to freak out and panic and back away, isn't it? There's a story in the New Testament about a young Simon Peter, one of the disciples of Jesus, and he wanted to walk on the water with Jesus, and Jesus says, come on out, and they start walking on the water, and it was so great, it was so fun. And then Peter looked up and saw wind and waves. And he started panicking and he started sinking. He's right next to Jesus, God, right there. And he's freaking out because of a little wind and some water. But isn't that what we do when we're immature? When we're immature in our faith, when there's been times I've been in conversations with people and they're like, yeah, I want to step up and serve. I want to come help out and I want to serve in this ministry. And they're all excited. And then the next week they come back to me and says, oh, things got really busy. I need to not do that now. Things got crazy in my life. And what's amazing about God is calling, if he is calling you to something, he's looking for your faith and your obedience, not your success. And do you understand that? If God's calling you to do something and you decide not to do it, that's disobedience. If God's calling you to do something, you decide to do it and it fails, that's still obedience. And that's what God's looking for. He's wondering if you're going to take a step of faith. Of course it looks tough. That's why you need faith in God to do it. Did God give David a sniper rifle to kill Goliath? No. He didn't even give him rocks. Like David had to go get his own rocks in order to kill Goliath. But he did. He took those steps. He walked down to the riverbed. He found 5 smooth stones and put them in his thing. And then he walked out on the battlefield. And guess who met him there? God. God was like, okay, you took a step of faith. Let's do this. I mean, that's how God works. He's wondering if we're going to obey him, if we're going to take those steps of faith. If you're waiting for God to give you the time and resources to do something great through you, you will be waiting forever. He's waiting for you to take that step, and he will meet you there. But you've got to take that step. And Daniel took thousands of steps throughout his life, and once again, he had to take one more step. God, I'm going to follow you, even if the lions get me. And the jealous officials acted like 2-year-olds, and they decided to go tattletale on Daniel, right? And it says in verse 13, and then they told the king, that man Daniel, the one who the captives of Judah, he's ignoring your law. He still prays to his God 3 times a day. And hearing this, the king was deeply troubled, and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. He spent the rest of his day looking for a way to get Daniel out of his predicament. Isn't it interesting that the king is concerned about Daniel? He's trying to get him out of trouble. Oh man, he's in this. Why? Well, because Daniel had this great reputation. He knew that Daniel was trustworthy and faithful. He'd been living this life. He had this character. It speaks to his character. And he says, I want him on my team. Now, when people look at you, if you were to disappear like Daniel was about ready to disappear, would people be upset about that? I know for some of us, they'd celebrate, right? Yeah. But would they be upset? Or would they say, no, I want them on my team? Here's another question. If this church, our people, Santa Rosa Christian Church, if we closed our doors tomorrow, would the community around us care or even notice? See, often churches have the reputation of being self-centered and they only think about themselves. I hope, and my prayer is that our church is one that has a good reputation of love and care for the community. Once again, here's a shameless plug for Harvest Party. People are walking in our doors and we get to love them. This is a great opportunity to share God's love and say, hey, we do care. We are so glad we're a part of this. Let us serve you. And children will walk in the door and they will walk in and they go, wow, that's a fun place. I want to come. I want to come back to this place. And parents are going, this is a safe place to bring my family. It's my hope that, anyone who walks in this door, everyone is welcome. Everyone can come, no matter what happened last night, no matter how hungover they are, no matter what happened maybe this morning, no matter what their past is, they can come here and they can connect with a God who loves them and wants to forgive them and give them life. That's where we could be. The king was like, I want Daniel to be here, but he realized he'd made this law. He got tricked by those guys. He made this irrevocable law. And so at last, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. The king said to him, "May your God, whom you serve faithfully, rescue you." The stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed the stone with their own royal seal and the seal of his nobles so that no one could rescue Daniel. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment and couldn't sleep at all that night. So here he is, Daniel, sleeping at night in the den of lions. I want to show you this picture. It's a painting by Henry Tanner. And my children, they go to an art school, and Judah and River, they go to this art school. And I happened to be, I was meeting with a principal one day, and I had a stack of books. He's like, "What are you reading?" They're all books on Daniel. And I go, "Well, I'm going to talk on Daniel." And he goes, "You know what? There is this painting." And he looked it up, and he showed me this painting here. He goes, "There's this painting that I love to teach to my art students about just this painting and what it means to me." And he says, "I love the composition of it. This is Daniel in the lion's den." He goes, "But what really strikes me, what really gets to me is look at Daniel. Look at how peaceful Daniel is. I mean, he's just chilling there. I mean, I would be freaking out. Like, there's this, I like cats and lions are cute on television. But right next to you, I mean, look at that one, and he's looking, he's like, hey, that leg looks delicious, And Daniel is just sitting there at peace. His hands are folded, he's sitting down. He's got this peace. See, I believe he had this peace because he'd been walking this life of faith. He'd been exposed to life and death situations over and over, and every time he chose faith. When I honor God first, he sees me through it. And he had this maturity. Not that he didn't get scared, because we all get scared, but when you do, remember to put your faith in God and not into yourself. Because he couldn't. I mean, he's 80 years old. Could he defend himself against those lions? No way. I mean, no one could. And he said, I'm going to have to put my faith in God. And so he, at peace, did that. Where are you stressed out in your life today? Where are you afraid? I'd be willing to bet that wherever you're stressed, wherever you're afraid, is where you're trying to live your life off of your power and not off of God's. Are you stressed out about this current political climate? Well, are you trusting in people or God? Are you stressed out about your current financial situation? Are you trusting in worldly wealth or eternal wealth? See, Daniel, at the end of his life, had come to realize that this world is temporary. That pain is temporary. Our physical discomfort and comfort is temporary. He knew that deep within him, even if the lions were to devour him, the story would not be over because we are made for greater things than this. So the rest of the story goes like this. Very early the next morning, the king got up and he hurried down to the lion's den. When he got there, he called out in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, what was your God whom you serve faithfully able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, long live the king. My God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth, and they would not hurt me, for I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed, and ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den. Not a scratch was found on him, for he trusted in God. Now here's where the Daniel story goes R-rated. That's why we're in the adult, the kids are over there, okay? Then the king gave orders to arrest the men who maliciously accused Daniel. Remember, the king is not a Christian. Okay? He had them thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. The lions leaped on them and tore them apart before they even hit the floor of the den. That is not what they told me about the story in Sunday school. As a 6-year-old, just think about this. There's a lot of Bible stories we like cartoonize, Noah and the ark, and we put the ark thing in the nursery, But think about all the other people who died in the flood, right? It wasn't a nice bedtime story. It was a nightmare for some, Anyways, I digress. But then look what the king says. Then King Darius sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. Peace and prosperity to you. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miracles and signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And once again, this is the second time a king decides to declare to his entire realm, and this king owned a lot of land, and he had a big empire. It stretched east and west, north and south. He was the superpower of the day, and he just proclaimed God's glory. Now, what would have happened if Daniel would have said, I'm 80 years old, I'm going to pass on this one? What if he would have let fear rule him? Well, I think none of that would have happened. There are people in that world that found out about God. And what's interesting is we're getting towards Christmas, and you know the story about the Magi, right? The Magi and the three kings, or the men from the east came. How in the world did they find out about this Jewish God and the son, the king, the child being born? Somehow they found out that there was a God that is powerful. And maybe Darius's little proclamation spread to the east and eventually got to these guys, and that planted a seed, and eventually they started learning about this Jewish king, this Jewish God. And eventually, 500 years later, they decided to take a road trip to Jerusalem and go visit this guy named Jesus. It's because Daniel chose to be faithful. People began to know. That's how you survive in Babylon, is being faithful. Choosing not to quit. You know, the guy who quits, does anyone ever remember that person? No. It's the people who are faithful, who finish. Now I want to challenge you, where in your life is God calling you to be faithful? Where in your life is God calling you to take that next step of faith? And if you're struggling with that fear, that fear that you have, and maybe you're afraid of losing something by taking that step of faith, what can you gain by taking that step of faith with God? I love this quote from Brother Lawrence. He says, "Let us often reflect that our only concern in this life is to please God. Everything else is just silly and selfish." That's the truth, man. Everything I stress about, silly. Oh, what's going to happen here? Oh, will this get paid? Oh, will I be able to clean up all my limbs in my yard? Come on, Dustin. You're losing sleep over that? Really? Silly and selfish. So today, I want to challenge you to choose faith. Follow Daniel's example. I mean, after a while, it becomes easier. It's never way easy, but it becomes easier. And you begin to see this pattern of God, and He will follow you, and He will help you take those steps of faith. But you need to have the courage to do it. I want to challenge you. We're going to close in prayer. Can we stand as I pray for you? I just want to pray for your faith, that it would be strong and not be overcome by outside circumstances. God, would you give these people here today courage to remain faithful even when outside circumstances seem to go crazy? Even when things look bad, help them be faithful. Even if the lions eat us up, God, help us to be faithful. Would we see with your eyes that no matter what is happening on the inside, your peace is ruling us? No matter what happens on the outside, your peace is ruling us on the inside. God, may we be people of faith, just like Daniel. Follow his example a lifetime example of faithfulness and consistency and not quitting. Be with these people today as they have to have this courage to take the step of faith, and I know you will meet them every step of the way. In Jesus' name.